What's going on, everybody? It's RealYJ coming at you with a brand new video, and things have been quite interesting for the most recent Yu-Gi-Oh! Format. Between new, random, exciting decks taking up the reins to be top contenders, and the upcoming release at the end of July of the new set Duelist Nexus, things could be looking pretty crazy. And it only gets even more confusing and intriguing when you see just how many different decks you can play, so many that for this month's tier list, I literally could not find the heart in me to put all the decks that I want to put on here. And so, as a heads up, if you don't see your favorite deck on here, or if it's a deck that has been on previous tier lists, but isn't currently on this tier list, don't worry, it doesn't mean that's not tiered or anything, or that I hate it or something like that. I don't have like any biases against it. It literally just means that I needed to conserve room, otherwise I'd be sitting here for over an hour and a half with like the tiniest crunched up little squares on the screen. But with all of that out of the way, I don't want to waste any more time. Let's go ahead and get right into my competitive Yu-Gi-Oh! Tier list for the July 2023 format, post Duelist Nexus and the Remote Duel YCS. Starting us off, we have Branded, and I still think that Branded is a really good deck. I think especially with the Nadir package, you can easily play past cards like Ash Blossom, and of course, even without Expulsion that was taken away by the last Forbidden and Limited list, you're still puppet locking using Sanctifier Dragon. You literally just require like one extra card in hand to do it. And so overall, I think Branded is fine. I think a lot of people, though, have just stopped giving it the representation because they realize, oh, it's not as good as some other decks you could play, like Kashtira, for example. But I definitely want to put it in the tier 2 category. I might bump it up to 1.5 depending on how the tier list ends up shaping up. But I think there's so much that Branded can do, and that a lot of people don't give it the credit it deserves just because a card like Ash Blossom exists. Coming up next is a new addition to the tier list, that being For Hire, more specifically like Runic For Hire. I think Sprite's thrown in there occasionally too. Not quite sure. I just know that this deck has been popping up left and right recently, so much so that even other YouTubers are making guides on how to beat it and stuff, which I'm not sure if it's that good. It might just be because a lot of people don't understand how the For Hire cards work. But to give credit where credit's due, this deck has actually been topping several events, including the Remote Duel YCS, and so I'm tempted for now. I'm gonna put it in tier 2. I'm actually gonna bump Branded to 1.5 because I need to look at other event charts instead of just the YCS. But I'm going to bump Branded to 1.5, and I'm going to put this at the top of tier 2. I think this deck is actually doing shockingly well. It might change once people understand how to play around the For Hire cards, but honestly, I could see this deck being pretty good in the future because it's always been something that's like a little blip on the radar. Next up on our list is Plunder Patrol, and Plunder Patrol actually came back to the tier list after not being on the last couple, I believe. Definitely wasn't in the last one, and that's because it did get a top at the Remote Duel YCS. But that doesn't mean it's not rogue, y'all. I mean, this deck loses to so many things, especially cards like Dimension Shifter, and I think it's just way too basic and linear to actually see too much success outside of the occasional top here and there. Next up, we have Sword Soul, and I'm going to put Sword Soul in the 1.5 category. Thinking if I want to bump it higher, probably not, because it's actually fallen back off a little bit. It seems like every new format, we end up seeing a bunch of like Sword Soul spikes in tops and in success, but then eventually just drops back down because people want to play something more interesting. I think Sword Soul isn't a bad deck at all, especially with all of the cool Super Heavy Samurai and Denglong plays and all that you can do with the deck. I think the big thing about Sword Soul, though, that's preventing it from seeing as many tops, though, is that it's just boring. Like, a lot of people don't play Sword Soul, not because it's not good, but because it's just so linear and easy to play most of the time that you want more of a challenge and you want to play something more unique and interesting. But that doesn't mean the deck isn't strong though, and so I do want to put it in the 1.5 category. Next up is another new addition to the tier list, and this is actually the Chimera series of cards based on Chimera Fusion for the new Illusionist typing coming out of Duelist Nexus. And I think this is a really cool strategy. I love the way it blends like Fiends and like the Illusionists and stuff. But being cool doesn't necessarily mean you're gonna be good. I think it's definitely a rogue tier strategy. It's got a lot of really good cards in terms of like actual deck functionality. Like, it's got a lot of consistency pieces and such. It's just that what it does isn't very much. I think it's like an end phase hand rip and something like that. It just gets a lot of consistency more than anything, and then it has a big bungus guy. While it's definitely going to be cool to see how the Illusionist typing shapes out in the future, right now it's definitely not going to do very much in my opinion. Next up, we have Dark World, and Dark World hasn't been doing too hot, not gonna lie. I'm I'm gonna put it in Rogue if it'll get between these there. Keep in mind, by the way, the order in each of these rows doesn't really matter too much. It's just kind of like a random thing I like to do. I think that Dark World is fine. There's just so many other better decks you can play that don't end up losing to themselves more than anything. And then again, cards like Shifter and everything like that, a lot of people are still on Droll. You're gonna have a really bad time trying to play Dark World right now, in my opinion. Next on our list, we have Drytron, and Drytron's going to go into the tier 2 category. For those that are interested, by the way, I do have a new Drytron deck profile up on the channel with our good friend Chris on the channel. It's like his pet deck. It has been for the last like 2 years. And I think that Drytron is a really, really good deck. It's literally not even power crept or anything like someone in my comments said. It's literally just all the counter cards that makes Drytron so infuriating to play. However, while it does get countered by the same stuff as Dark World mainly, it's still better than Dark World overall, and it can literally make so many different nasty game enders such as Magician of Black Chaos Max, and then push for game with cards like Cyber Angel Natasha super easy, that I'm going to keep it in the tier 2 category rather than putting it any lower. Next on our list we have Eldritch, and as always, Eldritch seems to be bottom of the barrel when it comes to playing control decks right now, or stun decks, whatever you want to refer to it as. I think it's a really cool engine still, even if it is a little bit boring, but you're not really going to see success with Eldritch as opposed to like a different trap deck like Labrynth. Next on our list we have Floowandereeze, and I'm tempted. I think Flu is really, really good. Shifter is still a really good card. They have access to so many different nasty things even without the barrier statue. I'm gonna put it at the top of tier 2, though it's liable to go to the bottom of 1.5 if I don't find something else to fill the category. I think that Flu is a really good deck still. It doesn't really need the barrier statue as it's been proving. Like, it's been seeing tops here and there, and then it also peaks back down, or I should say plummets back down. It just keeps like bouncing back and forth. I think it's mainly just representation more than anything. A lot of people don't like playing Flu. They don't want to play Flu. So a lot of people, when they see a deck get hit on the list, they don't even want to try playing it, which will happen when we talk about like Super Heavy Samurai and stuff like that. But I think the deck is still perfectly fine, especially with its consistency. Oh my god, y'all. Exosister won the remote duel YCS, and I still could not give less of a shit. This deck still isn't that great compared to other things you could play. A lot of people still forget how tiers work. It doesn't mean a rogue or a tier 2 deck can't win an event. It just means it's going to be a lot easier to use a higher tier deck. I still don't like Exosister. Cry about it. Next up, we are bringing Fluffal back into the tier list. This deck actually did top a regional recently, and it's still not that great of a deck, y'all. As much as I love Fluffal, and I'm probably going to end up playing it at locals this Friday, which actually it's Friday when this video goes up, so hi, I might be playing Fluffal today. It's definitely not a very great deck for a lot of people to pick up. It's a deck that requires a lot of practice with. Like, it's genuinely such a galaxy brain deck in terms of the combos, because it's not just a big bungus OTK deck like it used to be. And even if you're the best player in the world, you can still end up losing to the sheer amount of bricks that this deck can end up having. I think it can make some really cool stuff, you know, Dragostapelia, Apo, Toad, all that stuff on an end board, but it's really just not enough when you have to have such dedication to the deck, only to end up losing to bad luck or because your opponent had a better deck. Next up, we finally have Kashtira, which is going to be, of course, in the tier 1 category. It still takes up the majority of top cuts at most events. It's still easily the best deck in the format. 1, a Rise Heart, and 2, Unicorn does not matter. Have you read Kashtira Birth? Next up is Labrynth, and Labrynth is a little bit interesting to me. I think Labrynth is a really good deck. I think it can see a lot of success, but I'm torn on what placement to put it, because it seems like every time Labrynth starts doing well, everyone starts preparing for it. When everyone starts preparing for it, it starts plummeting again, and then people stop preparing for it, and then so on and so forth. It just creates a perpetual cycle. I think overall, hear me out on this one, I think Labrynth is a really, really good deck. You just have to be prepared for your opponent to have all these different board breakers and such. But with access to literally any normal trap in the game you want from your deck, it's really easy to just get the exact card you need for each scenario. Deck Devi against Sprite, Eradicator against most decks, Dimensional Barrier for Sword Soul and Branded, so on and so forth. You just have so many different contingency plans. The main thing that Labrynth loses to is, I'm pretty sure, just Evenly and maybe Harpies occasionally. But those cards don't stop those nasty lingering floodgates from going off, so I think that Labrynth is a really, really solid deck. and I'd recommend checking it out if you're interested in a control deck right now. Next on our list is Mannadium, and Mannadium's actually getting some really nice support out of Duelist Nexus. It's getting a lot of the Visa stuff that we're also going to be getting in the Age of Overlord set as well. Like, we're getting a lot of Visa stuff coming up, and I think that it definitely helps the deck a lot. However, I don't think it's going to be super good. I'm definitely putting it above Drytron, exosister, stuff like that. I think it's definitely going to be a really solid deck. It's just a really complex deck that requires a lot of different combo lines to go through. And honestly, it was a deck that, back during Super Heavy and Kashtira format and stuff like that, it just felt like a deck that you'd rather play a deck like Super Heavy, which is a lot simpler for bigger results. However, I would not be surprised if we see a die-hard Mannadium player end up going to an event and taking the entire thing. I think it's a really good deck, but it's going to require a lot more thought going forward. Next up is Mathmech, and Mathmech I think is perfectly fine. It's been topping still, like, left and right. Like, Circular going to 1 does hurt significantly, yeah, but just play 2 more hand traps. Easy. Access Code is still legal, Update Jammer is still legal, Heat Soul's still legal, Super Factorial into Laplacion is literally still one of the most broken things I've ever seen. Like, I don't know why a lot of people act like a consistency hit to a deck just completely ends its life. Next on our list we have Makonko, and Makonko's actually been making some waves recently. Not to mention, it's getting some new support out of Duelist Nexus. It gets like this really good trap card, I'm pretty sure. And does it get anything else? I'm trying to remember. Oh yeah, it gets the super good Ritual Monster. While I do still think Libromancer is probably the slightly better version of the deck to play, you can still absolutely see success with a going second version of Makonko, especially with the new stuff. Like, a lot of people aren't prepared for Kaiju Slumber or just Kaijus in general, followed by punching into it with like 2 monsters per game. Next on our list is Naturia. I think Naturia is fine. I think it's still an okay engine. I'm gonna put it at the top of Rogue though. I think that I did say consistency hits don't usually kill decks, but when it comes to Naturia, it was less consistency by losing 2 copies of Sacred Tree, and more so the recovery that it had, because the engine for Naturia, by utilizing Sacred Tree over and over, you could get multiple searches in 1 turn, but also have searches later on, and so not having access to those later searches is a really big problem. I think that if you tried really hard enough, especially with the new Runic stuff coming out, I mean, Runic's still a really good engine for no reason, I think you could definitely see success with Naturia. I just think it's a lot harder. Next on our list is Purrely, and I think Purrely is going to be really good. Oh my god, you only have 1 copy of Delicious Memory. Yeah, have you read the new Noir? Like, Sleepy Memory finally has a target, and it's really good. Like, you get a double bounce, and that's kind of crazy. And up to thrice per turn when you activate a Purrely quick play, you can attach it and then set any Purrely trap. Did I mention they're getting a new trap that functions as Leap, but even better? It's already still been topping despite losing the 2 copies of Delicious Memory, because, you know, you can still play regular Purrely. You don't need to sit on the Noir 9 times out of 10. But I think it's going to see even more representation and even more success in this upcoming format. Next up, we have Dragon Link, and I'll admit, Dragon Link has been doing a lot better than it usually does lately, and I think that's pretty interesting. I mean, Dragon Link hasn't really changed, I don't think. I know Assault Synchron is kind of seeing play here and there, maybe Rocket Coder or something like that, but I really didn't think it would have this much of an effect on Dragon Link as it actually has. So much so that I want to put it in the 1.5 category, which is pretty funny because I have been putting it at like the bottom of tier 2, or like the middle of tier 2, basically every single list. But it's been seeing a lot more success, and that means a lot more play lately, and I think the more play that it sees, it's going to see a lot more tops in the top cuts. Next on the list, we have Trap Tricks, and I still think Trap Tricks is pretty good, but it's not great. I mean, you still die to evenly. It hasn't really gotten anything new, any new tools to utilize. It's definitely still fine, and you can still probably see success at your locals with 3 Trap Trick Structure decks and some Parallel Exceeds, but personally, I think it might be time to move on. And this is Rich coming from the person whose top videos are literally Trap Tricks. Next up, we have Sky Striker, and I'll admit, Sky Striker's actually been doing a lot better lately. I mean, who would have thought giving him 2 extra copies of Multi-Roll and another copy of Engage would literally make them good? The deck's definitely still power crept though, so I'm gonna put it probably below the Runic for Hire, Sprite, whatever you want to call it. I think the deck's actually still pretty good. I mean, it did get power crept considering it's been, god, 5 years since the release of the deck. And one of the main reasons that it thrived back then was because of Master Rule 4 and stuff after the 2020 revision, and of course after the January 2020 Forbidden Limited list. It definitely saw a lot less success, but I think right now it's probably a pretty good deck to play. Next up we have Tri-Brigade, and I love Tri-Brigade, but come on y'all, it's a bit cope right now. There's not too many different good variants of Tri-Brigade. There's like Sprite and Bird Up, and Bird Up is a bit outdated without Samorg. There's not too much you can do against like certain disruptions and everything. And then Sprite Brigade, I mean, like, come on, without Elfish, it's total cope, y'all. If you want to prove me wrong about Bird Up though, check out my deck profile and combo tutorial for June 2023. Next up we have Sprite. I'm going to put Sprite in the tier 1 category. I think it's still one of the top 3 decks you could play right now. Really solid, didn't really lose very much. I mean, a copy a starter, ooh, big deal. A lot of people are playing the live twin builds anyway with the runic stuff, so you don't even need multiple copies of starter. One of the lists I was looking at actually only played 1 willingly. Like, as long as Gigantic's a card, I don't think Sprite's going to die as an engine. Next is Marincess, and I gotta be real with y'all, I do not remember where I put Marincess in my last tier list, but I'm gonna put it at the top of Rogue. It's been doing pretty decent, but it's definitely like the queen of the Rogue decks, if you want to call it that, because it's definitely not a super high tier deck, but it requires a person that knows the ins and outs of the deck. I'll admit, Marincess was a pretty complicated deck when I played it. A lot of combo lines, especially through hand traps, were really complex. And so it's going to require a dedicated pilot that really enjoys the deck in order to see a lot of success with it consistently. Alright, next up we have a Super Heavy Samurai, and I think Super Heavy is a really interesting topic because as a deck, Super Heavy Samurai seems to have fallen off the face of the earth. I think it would have still been fine, not gonna lie, just play around like a few different combos, a few different hands instead of just the 1 card combos. However, as an engine, Super Heavy has been thriving lately. You see Super Heavy Monodium, Super Heavy Earth Machine, Super Heavy Sword Soul is a really good one. Hell, I think I've even seen Super Heavy Kashtira just to make Baron early. Like, genuinely, Super Heavy has so many different applications that I'm probably not even ranking it as a deck right now. Ranking it as an engine, I want to put it above all of the other archetypes down here in tier 2. I think it's a really solid engine. Will we see the deck topping very much? Probably not, but will we be seeing a lot of decks playing an engine of Super Heavy Samurai topping? Probably, in my opinion. Next up we have Plant Link, and Plant Link's consistently been topping as well. I think it's a pretty solid deck. There's not too much to talk about on it. The deck hasn't really changed, I don't think. Maybe they got something in Battles of Legend. Be sure to let me know in the comments if they did. Next up we have Tearlament, and much like a lot of the other decks in the Rogue category, it's going to require a mad lad player to actually pilot this deck properly. I'll put it probably above Plunder Patrol, as much as I don't want to put it above some of these decks at the bottom. It has been topping here and there, but again, it requires such a specific pilot and build and like all these different other factors, especially because it's such a luck-based deck, that I don't want to move it higher from Rogue anytime soon. Alright, before we get into the last 2 here, I think I want to shuffle around and make a few changes. I'm probably going to put Trap Tricks actually at the top of the Rogue tier because it hasn't been topping too much lately. And, well, actually, I lied. I think that's the only change. Next up, we have Dinosaur, and Dinosaur had already gotten pretty decent after the support from Wild Survivors, but it wasn't seeing that many tops compared to what people were expecting. However, out of Duelist Nexus, we are getting the brand new Volzar Raws, which gives you an even better target to summon off of your Xenometeoros, and I do want to put it in the tier 2 category. I'm just not sure where. I think it's probably not going to see as much representation as these decks up here, but I want to put it in tier 2. I think it's a pretty solid deck. I'm genuinely just shocked it hasn't been seeing as much representation. And finally, we have Vanquished Soul, and Vanquished Soul has proved me wrong from being the deck that I thought was going to be pretty bad at first, and I still don't think the deck is like too super amazing, but it has been seeing a lot of top cut success, a lot of representation. I'm not sure why a lot of people were drawn to the deck, but it has been seeing a lot of play, and its tops are pretty consistent. While it's not like winning every event, it's definitely topping just about every event, even if it's only one. It does have its weaknesses though, like getting your Raisin Ash or not opening Raisin at all, but I think the deck is very open to having a bunch of different builds and a lot of creativity going into it, and I think going forward, especially once Age of Overlord hits, it's going to be a deck that's going to hang around for a good amount of time. Well, everybody, it seems like that's going to do it for my tier list for the July 2023 format. Again, I'm sorry if I missed out on any decks. I know a few things that are very important to know out of Duelist Nexus. Altergeist getting the new support. I don't think it's going to climb very much higher than tier 2 or maybe even the top of Rogue. I think Altergeist is really cool and it definitely gets a lot more combo heavy come the new support, but it doesn't really support the game plan too much. I don't think Rescue Ace is really going to do anything over here. Same with Nemlaria. And then Unchained, while I definitely think it can top an event here or there, it's not going to climb higher than the tier 2 category.
But Aurora, what about the new Earth's Arctic card?
But with all that out of the way, let me know in the comments below what deck are you playing this format, especially after Duelist Nexus, because that's going to do it for the video. If you liked it, please sure leave a like, as I'll split this video and the channel into YouTube recommended. And if you like this content and you want to see more like it, like the rest of my tier list, then perhaps consider subscribing, because I'm going to 5,000 subscribers by the end of 2023. Not to mention, it supports the channel more than anything else, and it's absolutely free. Also, if you want to support me directly while getting some awesome TCG merchandise in the process, check out my sponsor Tapio cards in the link down below. Use code Aurora5 for 5% off at checkout and to support me financially. Once again, thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. This is Aurora, signing off.